Rex Ryan, Tony Grossi, Mary Kay Cabot. One by one, the voices that once doubted SHEDEUR Sanders are walking back their words. At the center of this trend is Cris Carter, who famously branded Sanders as overhyped and underprepared. Carter's pivot, from open disdain to vocal praise, might be the most jarring of all. It wasn't just a correction, it was a public mea culpa. And it came after the Browns made their announcement. If you're into the real story and all the messy twists they don't show on highlight reels, go ahead and subscribe. And if you're sticking around to see how this Browns QB chaos plays out, you should definitely be subscribed. Sanders will lead the team as QB1 in 2026. For a player whose character and competence were both questioned, the reversal signals something deeper than individual regret. They show how quickly narratives unravel when they're no longer defensible. SHEDEUR didn't ask for apologies. He earned them. His approach to criticism was methodical. Stay quiet, play well, and let the facts pile up. Over time, even the harshest skeptics had to acknowledge what was unfolding. As each analyst reversed course, it became clearer that the initial wave of doubt said more about bias than reality. Sanders didn't just win games. He forced a reckoning in the media room. The truth always lands hardest when it's backed by results. And right now, the truth is this. SHEDEUR Sanders is the starting quarterback for Cleveland Browns heading into the 2026 NFL season, and the very people who dismissed him are now scrambling to rewrite their scripts. At the center of this media about-face is Cris Carter. Yes, that Cris Carter, the Hall of Famer who made a name for himself not only on the field, but in the studio as one of the more blunt voices in sports commentary. A guy who has never exactly shied away from controversial takes. And when it came to SHEDEUR Sanders, he went in hard. We're not talking about constructive critique. We're talking about Carter flat out saying SHEDEUR should be drafted in the 5th round, that he lacked arm strength, that he wasn't athletic enough, that he didn't have the tools to make it in the NFL. He called his mental toughness into question. And it didn't stop there. He dragged Deion Sanders, saying Prime was coddling his son, shielding him from adversity, and stunning his development in the process. That wasn't just skepticism. That was character assassination wrapped in so-called analysis. But now, that same Cris Carter is publicly apologizing. The words came straight from him. I'm mature. I made a mistake. He didn't dance around it. He didn't try to reframe what he meant. He owned the L. And honestly, that's rare, especially in a business where doubling down is standard procedure. Why the sudden pivot? Because the Browns made it official. SHEDEUR Sanders isn't in a competition. He isn't being developed. He's QB1. Full stop. And not only that, the Browns have already started building around him. The team fired head coach Kevin Stefanski, an established name, clearing the path for a new coaching staff that better fits the player they now view as the centerpiece of the franchise. Let's not downplay that. A team doesn't get its coaching leadership unless they're absolutely sure of the guy they're building around. And now that guy is SHEDEUR. And Carter? He's not just saying my bad. He's now endorsing Sanders, talking up his poise, his leadership, his command of the offense. He's gone from doubter to defender overnight. He even said Dillon Gabriel, another quarterback on the Browns roster, should be traded immediately, calling him irrelevant to the team's future. From calling SHEDEUR a long-term project to saying his competition should be shipped out. That's not a soft reversal. That's a complete 180 with the hazard lights on. But Carter's apology is only part of the story, because he wasn't the only one who doubted SHEDEUR. This was part of a larger wave of skepticism from major figures across sports media. Rex Ryan, Tony Grossi, Mary Kay Cabot, all of them expressed doubts about SHEDEUR's NFL readiness. Not just his game, but his attitude, his background, and his ability to handle pressure. There was a tone to it, a dismissiveness rooted in the belief that SHEDEUR had been handed too much too soon, and that eventually reality would catch up with him. Except reality didn't break him. It elevated him. While all that criticism was swirling, SHEDEUR didn't take the bait. He didn't throw shade. He didn't get into spats on social media. He didn't clap back at Carter or Ryan or anyone else. He stayed focused. Let his game speak for him. That silence, that professionalism, That's what ended up separating him from the pack. Because while the media built up narratives about how he couldn't handle adversity, SHEDEUR was facing it and excelling in real time. The Browns weren't just watching. They were investing. And when they saw enough, they made the move. QB1, that wasn't just about ability. It was about trust, about leadership, about showing up when it mattered. And now, the same people who once dismissed him have no choice but to acknowledge it, because the evidence is overwhelming. You can't argue with performance. You can't argue with an organization backing a player with that much decisiveness. This is the part where media accountability becomes more than a buzzword. Cris Carter's apology is meaningful, not just because he changed his mind, but because he did it publicly. He didn't try to shift the blame. He didn't spin it into a growth opportunity. He said he was wrong. And that kind of public reversal puts pressure on the others. Because now, staying quiet looks worse. Sticking to the old takes makes you look out of touch. And that's what this entire moment represents. A reckoning. A point where the performance became too undeniable for the old opinions to survive. Even the evaluation metrics that were used to drag SHEDEUR, his size, his arm strength, his 40 time, have started to look laughably shallow. Because none of that measured his football IQ, his ability to read defenses, his consistency under pressure, his leadership in the locker room, the stuff that actually wins games. And that's exactly what's been on display in Cleveland. When you zoom out, this whole situation is also about how much influence organizational validation has. Once the Browns said, "This is our guy," the media takes shifted fast. That's not coincidence. That's how this cycle always works. Before, critics could lean on hypotheticals. Now, they're faced with a franchise that bet the house on SHEDEUR Sanders. And when you're up against reality, your narrative either adjusts or becomes irrelevant. That's why Carter's apology matters. It sets a new tone. It signals that even the loudest voices have to acknowledge when they got it wrong. And it sends a message to the rest of the sports media world. Adapt or get left behind. Because while analysts were busy writing him off, SHEDEUR was rewriting the playbook. He didn't ask for anyone's approval. He didn't perform for validation. He worked. He grew. And he earned the trust of an NFL franchise that has historically struggled to find stability at quarterback. The fact that SHEDEUR now holds that role and is being supported by top-down organizational changes should be a loud wake-up call to every critic still clinging to outdated takes. This wasn't about hype. It was about execution. It's also a perfect example of how subjective bias can derail objectivity in sports media. So many of the original critiques had less to do with SHEDEUR's actual performance and more to do with his image, his background, the presence of his father, his confidence, his flash. They framed those traits as liabilities instead of asking the most basic question. Can he play? Now they have their answer. And it came with a highlight reel. SHEDEUR Sanders didn't change who he was. The media had to change how they saw him. And if that's not the most poetic version of media accountability in sports, what is? So whether you were someone who never doubted him or someone who needed to see the receipts play out, you're watching a moment that doesn't happen often. A young athlete who kept his head down, blocked out the noise, and let his game break the cycle. And now, the same cycle that once tried to bury him is trying to get behind him. So if you're here for the full story, the criticism, the comeback, and the retractions, go ahead and like this video. Drop a comment with the coldest take you saw about SHEDEUR that didn't age well. And hit subscribe, because we got a feeling this isn't the last time the media is going to have to eat their words. This QB1 era, it's just beginning. What makes this story hit even harder is that it's not just about one quarterback proving a few doubters wrong. It's about a complete dismantling of the media's favorite blueprint. And SHEDEUR Sanders did it without saying a single word back to the critics who tried to tear him down. This is about the structure of how young talent gets judged. It's about how some athletes are given benefit of the doubt, while others are dissected under a microscope before they ever take a professional snap. SHEDEUR didn't come into the league with a clean slate. He came in with baggage, not his own doing, but attached to him because of his last name, his college choices, and the media's obsession with optics over outcome. He had the nerve to show up confident. He had the audacity to play for his father. And worst of all in some eyes, He didn't play the grateful prospect role. He knew his value and didn't shrink to make others comfortable. And that infuriated a certain kind of analyst. So they tried to reduce him to his flaws. They said he was too small. His arm wasn't strong enough. He wasn't mobile enough. And when those criticisms didn't stick, they pivoted to his personality. Suddenly, confidence became arrogance. Playing for your father became nepotism. Any mistake, no matter how minor, was proof that he wasn't built for the league. But here's the thing. While they were arguing about perception, SHEDEUR was stacking real-time, real-world proof. Because when he got to Browns, he didn't walk in expecting special treatment. He earned every inch of that locker room's respect. He didn't come in talking about the doubters. He came in working. He understood the moment and the stakes. And he delivered. So when the Browns finally made official, when they said, "We're naming SHEDEUR Sanders our starting quarterback," that wasn't just a depth chart update. That was a verdict. And it wasn't just about him winning the job. It was about everything the critics said he wasn't being flat out wrong. And then came the media reckoning. It's one thing for a team to name a young quarterback as a starter. It's another when that choice forces longtime critics to backpedal in real time. Cris didn't just say SHEDEUR wasn't ready. He called him a fifth-round pick. He questioned his toughness. He said Dion was doing more harm than good by shielding his son. These were not mild concerns. This was all in dismissal. And it wasn't just wrong. It was loud, arrogant, and deeply personal. But now, Carter's the one telling people that SHEDEUR has elite leadership, total command of the offense, and should be treated as the Browns' franchise QB for foreseeable future. He's not only praising SHEDEUR, he's calling for Dillon Gabriel to be traded, saying he has no place in the organization moving forward. And sure, credit to him for walking it back. It takes something to admit that publicly, especially when the internet has receipts. But let's not forget Carter and others like him built the mountain SHEDEUR had to climb. Now they want to pretend they're just reevaluating, that they've seen the light after a few preseason snaps and a coaching change? No, they didn't reevaluate. They got outperformed. SHEDEUR's game forced their hand. The Browns' decision forced their silence. The fans who followed every detail forced them to face the reality that the kid they said wouldn't make it, made it. And not by luck. Not because of politics. Not because of his last name. Because he could play. Because when the pressure was on, SHEDEUR didn't just survive it. He stayed calm, led his team, and excelled. And if anything, this whole media turnaround proves that the doubters never really understood what they were looking at. They were too locked into what they thought a quarterback was supposed to look like, and completely missed what one actually is. Now, the entire narrative is collapsing. Carter's apology isn't just a correction. It's a milestone. It's one of those moments where the media world has to stop, take a breath, and admit it got caught chasing the wrong story. Because SHEDEUR Sanders was never the story they tried to make him. He wasn't a pet project. He wasn't Dion's experiment. He wasn't an overexposed hype machine. He was a professional quarterback. One who kept his head down, let his play do the talking, and proved, without any theatrics, that he belongs. And now that he's officially QB1 for the Browns, every other voice in the media that tried to undermine him has to choose. Revise or become irrelevant. You can already see it happening. Rex Ryan and Tony Grossi, their tones are changing. The hostility is cooling. The opinions are softening. That's not a coincidence. That's how sports media always moves. Once it becomes clear that a player has institutional support, everyone falls in line. And this isn't just about public opinion. It's about professional credibility. If you're wrong too often, too loudly, and for too long, people stop listening. So when the Browns committed to SHEDEUR and showed the world they were building their future around him, the critics didn't just lose the argument. They lost the room. That's why Carter's apology matters. It wasn't just for SHEDEUR, it was for himself, for his legacy, for his ability to still be taken seriously in a sports media landscape that's becoming more data-driven, more evidence-based, and less tolerant of personality-driven bias. And what's wild is that SHEDEUR never asked for that apology. He didn't campaign for respect. He didn't beg for validation. He let the game unfold, and it spoke louder than any take ever could. This is a kind of full-circle moment you don't see often in pro sports. A young athlete doubted from day one, smeared by legacy voices, forced to prove himself 10 times over, finally gets the recognition he deserves. Not because he changed who he was, but because he never did. He stayed true. He stayed quiet. He stayed focused. And the league and the media eventually had to catch up. So now what? Well, SHEDEUR's a starter. The team is behind him. The coaching staff is being reshaped around him. The system is going to reflect his strengths. The question isn't, can he handle it anymore? It's how far can he go? And based on the way he's carried himself through this whole media firestorm, the answer is, as far as he wants. This is a redemption arc no one saw coming. Not because the potential wasn't there, but because too many people refuse to look past their own assumptions. Now they're seeing the truth. And it's got a number 1 jersey on. The SHEDEUR Sanders era hasn't even officially begun yet, and it's already forcing an entire industry to eat its own words. There's something poetic about the way this story has unfolded. A young quarterback, dragged to the mud before he ever threw an NFL pass, is now being publicly embraced by the very people who wrote him off. Not because they had a sudden epiphany. Not because he won them over with charm. But because he left them no other option. Cris Carter, who once took aim at SHEDEUR's work ethic, his talent, and even his upbringing, now is to wear the exact words he tried to use to define him. 5th rounder? Lacks toughness? Carried by his dad? All of that has collapsed under the weight of actual, undeniable performance. What SHEDEUR has done is expose a pattern, one we've seen before, but rarely this clearly. Media narratives aren't always based on reality. Sometimes they're built on vibes. And in SHEDEUR's case, the vibes were tied to his last name, his college path, and the fact that he didn't play by the media's unwritten rules. He didn't kiss the ring. He didn't tone it down. He didn't shrink himself to seem humble enough. So they called it arrogance. They called it entitlement. They wrapped their doubts in analysis and called it objectivity. But it wasn't. It was projection. It was discomfort with a player who refused to play the PR game. And now, the tape has made that obvious. Because let's be real, this didn't start with the Browns naming him QB1. That was just the turning point. The moment that made everyone stop pretending the old takes still held water. The moment that turned criticism into confession. And Cris Carter's apology? It didn't just signal his own reversal. It gave everyone else permission to finally stop fighting the truth. SHEDEUR Sanders is a franchise quarterback. He's not potential. He's not a developmental gamble. He's the centerpiece of a team that just restructured its future around him. That doesn't happen unless a front office, a coaching staff, and a locker room believe in you, not just as a player, but as a leader. And Carter, to his credit, finally acknowledged that. Not only did he own up to his earlier take, he praised SHEDEUR's leadership, his command, his maturity. And he went even further by saying Dillon Gabriel should be traded immediately. That part matters. Because not long ago, Carter wouldn't even put SHEDEUR above any proven backup. Now he's calling him the clear future and saying any other quarterback on the roster is irrelevant. That's not just an apology. That's a total rebrand. But here's the part that's worth sitting with for a second. SHEDEUR earned all of this. Not through interviews. Not through social media moments. But by keeping his head down and letting the work speak for itself. He never gave them a quote to run with. Never fueled the drama. He could have clapped back. He had every reason to. But instead, he chose to let his game do the talking. And that silence, that focus, that's what makes this so powerful. Because while the critics were busy trying to discredit him, SHEDEUR was just proving them wrong, play by play, week by week. And by the time the Browns made it official, there was nothing left to debate. You can't argue with QB1. You can't spin a team's full commitment to a player who's shown nothing but growth, poise, and leadership since the second he stepped into the building. You can't cling to your old narrative when a billion-dollar organization just put it in the shredder. The SHEDEUR conversation has moved. It's not about potential anymore. It's about trajectory, about ceiling, about how far he can take this Browns team now that he has the full weight of the franchise behind him. And if you look at the way analysts are racing to flip their positions, you can feel the panic. This isn't just about being wrong. It's about being loudly wrong on record in front of millions. And with fans pulling receipts left and right, everyone knows they don't have the luxury of hiding behind. Well, we didn't have the full picture back then. Because they did. They just didn't want to see it. They saw the confidence and called it cockiness. They saw the swagger and assumed it meant weakness. They saw the last name and assumed the story had already been written. But now, the story is very, very different. And the people who tried to write the ending too soon are realizing they were on the wrong page all along. This is what happens when you underestimate someone who's built to withstand pressure. When you misjudge someone who spent their entire life preparing to carry a name, a team, and a legacy, all without flinching. SHEDEUR Sanders didn't just beat the odds. He beat the narrative. He flipped the entire script without having to ask for a rewrite. And now, as he steps into the 2026 season as the Browns' starting quarterback, the message is clear. The kid you said wasn't ready is running the show. The player you thought was all hype is now the face of a franchise rebuild. And the takes that once dominated your feed, they're now sitting in the cold, collecting dust. So what now? Now we get to watch what happens after the apology. Because this is no longer about proving the haters wrong. That part's done. The haters have been forced to admit defeat. This next chapter? It's about what SHEDEUR does with the keys to the franchise. About how he leads. About how he grows. About how he turns all of this noise, past and present, into fuel for something bigger. And if the past year is any indication, he's not going to say much about it. He's just going to keep winning. So if you follow this journey from the start, you already know this isn't just a feel-good comeback story. It's a reminder that performance always drowns out perception. That quiet confidence beats loud opinions every time. And that no matter how many people try to define your story before it starts, they don't get the final word. The field does. If you're still here, hit like. Drop a comment with the worst take you saw about SHEDEUR, because you know they're out there. And make sure you subscribe, because the SHEDEUR Sanders era is just getting started, and if this is how it began, you're going to see how far it goes.